So what we have here today is a comparison video between the RTX 4080 and the RTX 5080, and more specifically, I have the RTX 4080 Founders Edition. The RTX 5080 that we have here is the MSI Ventus 3X OC, super long name. Basically, these are just gonna be my experiences that I had pulling out the 5080 out of the box, throwing it in the PC. I don't have a PC that I use for benchmarking. I just have my one PC that I use for gaming, editing, all that stuff. So like, I'm not changing over files. I'm not deleting the stuff. I'm not setting up a new Windows build just to test a graphics card. Also, huge shout out to every YouTuber that runs like a freaking gauntlet of like 10 plus 20, 30 games and averages all the frames per second and all that stuff too. And I will say that I did not have an average FPS counter in my benchmarks. I just set up like a new benchmark overlay, but I'm definitely going to add that as like another part in the future. But this video won't have it. And then also I do also have a 9700 XT that we're going to compare the 4080 and 5080 to as well. The MSI model, I'm not going to say I was excited for, because, you know, it's pretty expensive at, you know, like $1,300, almost $1,400 after tax. And if the performance was good, I was going to keep it. That was the plan. But as I was playing the game, and pretty much as I'm using this card and the FPS is like not that much different. Is this for real? This graphics card is so expensive for really no reason. I was having a hard time justifying the upgrade because I had already seen all the other videos that came out at launch and all that. Let's get into this because I had some pretty interesting findings. All of my stuff is done at 1440p. So, I know a lot of you guys probably have like these new OLED monitors, 1440p, 240 hertz, 360 hertz, even 480 hertz now. And I'm sure this year they're going to get even faster. I don't have a 4K gaming monitor. My rant's over. Let's go ahead and check out these benchmarks real quick. So first we have Black Myth Wukong, starting with frame gen, because frame gen is available on the 40 series as well as the 50 series, but supposedly on the 50 series you have more options and scaling for frame gen. I didn't include Cyberpunk. I don't have Cyberpunk, but basically looking at Black Myth Wukong, you know, it's about, let's say 10 to 15 FPS more with frame gen on than the RTX 4080 Founders Edition, mind you. And I'm like, that just seems like not enough to, like, if I paid $1,200 plus tax, so $1,300 for the 4080 2 years ago, the economy is worse, all that stuff, and I'm paying, you know, significantly, you know, $200 more for the same level of performance and a little bit worse thermals. The thermals are not too crazy in this game for direct comparison, but, you know, there is a little bit of a difference there. There's definitely a large difference in the build quality of the card for sure too. Underwhelming performance to say the least. We pop on over to native. So native, it's like barely any different. Like the 4080 is not really getting 60 FPS, it's getting like 55, 56. You know, it'll touch 60 here and there. But the 5080 starting off was about the same, and then it bumped up from getting 50 something FPS to about 70. There we have, let's say, another 10, 12 FPS difference. That's not really huge, and again, that's not performance you're really gonna feel. So in a AAA title, we're gonna be moving on to the next AAA title. Next, we have Dragon's Dogma 2. This is 1440p native at ultra settings, so no DLSS, no frame generation, and as you can see, like, both FPS levels are in the 70s, but we do see on the MSI card, the temps are a little bit higher. They're in the 70s. On the Founders Edition card, they're in the 60s. So everything else is largely the same. 7800X 3D is doing its job, and the FPS and native performance is really not that much different. But we're gonna move over to frame generation in a second, and again, it's really not that much different. This is the same ultra settings, but with frame generation and DLSS quality on. I really can't say that I'm impressed at all with this performance. So 180, 170-ish FPS performance, and really it's not that much different. It's actually using more GPU on the 4080 compared to the 5080. So that's kind of weird. Next, we're moving on to Forza Horizon 5, 1440p ultra settings, DLSS quality. And there is a little bit of a performance bump here. This is a slightly older game. This game is what, 5 years old now, 6 years old. I don't know. I haven't this game. I still play. It's pretty fun. It's a good racing game. Visuals are great. I don't really like the motorsport series because it's like a little bit too simmy for me. But Horizon is pretty fun. I digress. The performance here is a little bit better, but not by much. Like literally 10 FPS better. What are you gonna do with 10 FPS? It's not the difference between like 50 to 60, which is still not a huge deal. Like if that's the case, lower your settings a little bit and that's it. Like that's an easy fix. But to have them at the exact same settings and only get 10 FPS difference when it's already over 120 or 144 FPS, that's kind of crazy. Now we're gonna move over to frame generation because Horizon 5 does have frame gen as well. And you will be surprised that like there, the 5080 was actually flexing a little bit. I was like, okay, all hope is not lost. Looks like we got a solid performance lead. Like this is getting 240, 250 FPS. The 4080 was getting about 200. So I'm like, oh, okay, like that's pretty impressive. How do I put this? You're playing a racing game with a controller, so having the frame gen on is really not a big deal. But if that was a first-person shooter that you're playing with mouse and keyboard, that's really not something you want to do. But I will say, having the frame generation on and using a controller at a game that runs at a pretty high native frame rate is actually a pretty good experience. So I'm not going to cap and act like that's not a good idea. But nvidia, they actually did their thing with that. Like that's pretty impressive. Now moving over to Black Ops 6, and again here we're seeing somewhat comparable performance. I know I have some of the numbers kind of blocked a little bit with the tag and the title, but by the end of this, we will see that it doesn't really seem to be that much different performance. I'm actually really glad that a lot of these games have these built-in benchmark tools though. It's really good for consistency and it's easier because I'm usually like sitting here waiting for it to be done, bored out of my mind. 282 FPS on the RTX 4080 Founders and 278 on the 5080. Higher temps. I'm going to attribute the temperatures to the worst build quality on the graphics card. Performance wise, I didn't feel like this card was defective. Like I definitely feel like we had a defective, what is it, a 7900 XTX? I'll put the thumbnail up, but that's what we compared. I had the Founders or reference design of that. And I think that card was defective for sure. But this, I don't think is that, I don't think that that's the case here. And then moving over to Ultra again, very comparable performance. GPU utilization is comparable as well. Higher temps. And it's like, guys, I really can't tell the difference. I don't have an overclock or an undervolt on my 4080. And the Ventus is on whatever like the fastest preset is from the factory. And again, like it's basically the same level of performance within margin of error. And actually, when you look at it, it looks like it's worse. So like the bottleneck technically on the 4080 is worse, but on the 5080, it just seems like maybe the temperatures are not allowing more of the GPU to be utilized, but it just doesn't seem like something that really makes sense. And then we're going to use frame generation this time to see if the 5080 can gain some ground back in Black Ops 6. I don't know. 299 versus 291. It's crazy. It sounds crazy, but I think it's flipped. And I edited the video. It's not flipped, I promise you. But this level of performance is just crazy. Now, I'm using Fortnite competitive settings, which is basically putting everything on low. And then I have DLSS balanced on, which should give us a little bit more performance. But so far, the 5080 is getting basically the same performance in Fortnite compared to the 4080. So if you're using this just to play Fortnite, it's basically the same. Don't expect more performance, maybe just a tad, but really not much. And then using Lumen. Lumen is rough on Fortnite. Like you put on Lumen Max, it's like the game is barely running and the 1% lows are absolutely terrible. Now, both experiences were pretty stuttery, not gonna lie, but on the 50 series, the optimization has to be non-existent because the 1% lows were literally, 2 FPS. So it was putting hard pauses on the game when you ran it with Lumen High and especially Lumen Max. Lumen Max was crazy. It looks good, don't get me wrong. Like Epic, they're doing a good job with, their Unreal Engine and everything. But Luma's not really worth running. It looks great though, I'm not gonna lie. Like for these pretty basic 3D models, Luma looks really good. The last game I did was Marvel Rivals. This game's pretty fun. This is the only game where the 5080 kept a solid lead over the 4080. This is running at competitive settings, DLSS ultra quality, so everything's on low. And I will say, like, this game is pretty fun. I've not played this game much outside of just doing benchmarks, and it's surprising at like how intensive this game is on your system, but it does look really good. But if you don't have, you know, mid-range PC specs, you probably barely want to play this game. Pretty similar performance, but I will say, like, the number when you check on the 5080 typically was always higher than the 4080, and that was at bare minimum what I was expecting. And this is one of the only games that more evidently showed that. This is going to be ultra settings and DLSS ultra quality as well. Interesting. The 4080 is beating it again. So at competitive settings, it was doing better. When it came to using ultra settings, the 4080 is still doing better. How is that possible? Like, I'm really not sure. I'm sure that like some of this has to be some game optimization, I guess, but like, does it really have to be optimized that much? I mean, I'm not sure, but honestly, that was just very surprising to see. And I don't really know why the performance just seems so bad and underwhelming. Pulled out the 4080 founders, popped in the 5080 MSI, all the above. I was pretty disappointed. Is a 5080 even worth recommending to someone? Because if it's getting worse performance than the Founders Edition 4080, which I thought like the cooler was pretty decent. I didn't think it was anything like overly special. Definitely a little bit over engineered, and the build quality is substantially higher than any other graphics card that I've had before, and it definitely shows in these thermals as well. But the fact that pretty slim, which was the thing that I was actually kind of excited for the 5080, it was just more so the dimensions, less the performance. But then when I look at the performance analytics that I gather, I'm really not even excited for that. I don't think that it makes much sense to go with an RTX 5080 if you already have an RTX 4080. If you don't have a 4080, trying to track one down used is not fun right now. Like, you know, they're equally as expensive in most cases, or maybe slightly less. So it's like, at that point, do you just get the new one or not? But this is the caveat that I'm gonna add. If you can get your hands on a Founders Edition for a reasonable price, you should probably do that. If you can't and you gotta go with an AIB, I don't recommend going with this one, because this one, in my opinion, performance is just not good. The thermals didn't seem too crazy. Something about this card just doesn't seem right, nor does it make me want to buy another 5080 just to see if mine happen to be defective or something. But anyways, that's all I got for you guys. In terms of my build, I'll have all my specs in the description below so you guys can see the full outline of everything I'm running in my PC currently. That's all I got for you guys. Have a good rest of your day. I'll see you in the next one.